Alrighty, so season 1 is upon us. We have a pretty lengthy amount of PvP changes that came with the patch, and I'm not gonna lie, at first I had a pretty bad taste in my mouth with just the game in general. I was a part of the group of people that had all of their equipped gear, weapons, jewelry, and bags deleted on patch day, and was not able to play for I believe 2 or 3 days until that was resolved. So starting right off the bat, I was already put in a pretty bad mood. And then, as with most patches that we have come to see, performance does end up taking quite a bit of big hit as well. So any sort of PvP that I was able to get into felt really janky. But it's starting to kind of clear up a little bit. It feels a little bit better. I've gotten my gear back. I've gotten some time in with the patch. And I have to say, I'm genuinely enjoying a lot of these changes that they've made to PvP. Some of the really big ones that stood out for me were the changes to Fortify and Rend, to where Fortify especially it only scales off of your actual armor value now, instead of just giving everybody like a flat amount, which is really noticeable. People aren't just walking tanks anymore without actually being a tank. It seems like you actually have to build a tank build if you want to be a tank now, which is really good to see. On top of that, healers as well. Healers were in a state to where you essentially didn't have to play the game. You didn't have to learn your dodge roll timings or iframes, because you could just throw down a sacred and kind of just sit in there and not take damage from multiple people DPSing you at once. So now that people feel a lot more killable, PvP definitely feels a lot better. And then the other thing that kind of affects is big brawls. Usually in OPR, I tend to kind of avoid the big group that's fighting wherever they are on the map, because it just really wasn't fun for me, especially in a solo assassin build like I like to run. A lot of the times you were kind of just face rolling into a set of bruisers that were standing in sacred circles that couldn't die. And then when you went for the healers, they would just throw it down on themselves, and you were kind of just sitting there twiddling your thumbs. So now that both bruisers and healers are susceptible to dying if they don't actually play right, it definitely feels a lot better than what we've been kind of experiencing so far in the game. The other two changes are the changes to staggers. The fact that they kind of reduced the damage of a lot of the CC abilities, quote unquote, and then remove staggers from more damaging abilities. It really kind of helps round out the weapons in general. I feel you're still taking a lot more damage this patch, like I mentioned, because of that Fortify change, but you aren't just getting straight one shot by CC abilities, which felt really bad. At least now, if you get hit by a bunch of CCs, you have the chance to kind of recover and still make it out of the fight. And then the last one that I think everybody is kind of happy for, except for people who use the weapon, was muskets. It's no longer a bane of everybody's existence. But jumping into the build, because I know a couple of you guys are probably wondering, I did end up making a couple of changes to the build that I was running prior to this patch. Last patch I actually did end up getting regular pants, and I was running a couple of pieces of fortification on this setup, which I'm still gonna kind of test out to see how it feels now. But on top of that, I also ended up getting all of my refreshing pieces. So we made a change on our fire staff from what I was using before to back to the fire vine, just so we can get that refreshing slot there. Still running the sacred wood saber, but on our gear we have refreshing on everything. So we're running the sinful glare on our headpiece, refreshing empowering fireball, refreshing resilience, shirking energy resilient, and refreshing pillar. Because I don't have it on this piece, this is why I switched back to the fire vine, just to make sure that I had enough refreshing that I needed. and then refreshing resilience. And then taking a look at the jewelry, we have refreshing health, refreshing keen and hearty, and then refreshing toast. Now, as for the setup, we have made a couple of changes. As you probably are aware, Incinerate got gutted, although I don't think too many people are going to be unhappy about this because I was probably one of the only people that seriously used this ability. And it does suck that it is no longer viable, really. They pretty much have the damage that it had. You do have some ways to buff it. If you have the actual weapon perk for it, you get increased damage by anybody that's afflicted with a burn, but it still does not make up for the amount of damage that the ability lost. So Incinerate just kind of feels like it hits like a wet noodle now. So we made this switch over to Pillar of Fire. Taking a look at the Pyromancer tree first, we've got Pyromania, which is a really, honestly, before we even get into it, Firestaff got so many buffs. It's crazy. I'm just shocked that they patch things this way, where they just do a complete overhaul instead of kind of doing small incremental changes to see where the weapon's gonna sit. But the current state that Firestaff is in, it is an absolute pumper. But yeah, we get 10% increased damage against anybody that has a burn or a smolder. And the cool thing about this is we can proc burn with our Runeglass gem. So we can have that buff up even before we switch to our Firestaff. But assuming that we're engaging somebody at range, all it really takes is a light attack or heavy, and then you'll have this active. We're running Heat Up just to get some more burn stacks. All of the burns that we have last 20% longer. Watch it burn, and then all of Burnout. Now, Burnout is one of the abilities that is just absolutely busted now. It was already a really good ability because it did a pretty decent amount of damage, but it is probably one of the best, if not the best, mobility ability in the game. But on top of that, it now has this new final perk here, which adds the explosion. And essentially the way it works, if you're not aware, is at the end of your burnout, it does a AoE explosion. So as long as you're able to kind of gauge the distance on the person you're trying to target, you can pretty reliably land that explosion, and it does a really noticeable amount of damage. But yeah, Burnout is now the best ability in the game. And then taking a look at the Fire Mage side, I'm going to talk about Pillar in a second here, but we're running pretty much all of the same passives that we used to run on the Fire Mage side of the tree. So Singe, Spellslinger, Prophet of a Fire God, we've got everything on Fireball and our Rune. I'm actually not running Flare. Personally, the reason for that is I prefer a more consistent accuracy, I guess, on my heavy attack rather than having the splash damage on it. The 25% slower travel time is actually quite noticeable, especially when you're trying to attack people who are further away. It makes it a little bit more difficult to land the attack, and me personally, I just would prefer to have more consistent heavies when I'm attacking somebody at range versus having the splash damage on multiple targets. I find that most of the time people aren't super clumped up, although they do end up getting clumped up sometimes, to where this ability would definitely be helpful. But at the end of the day, I just prefer, especially for when I'm fighting bow players or even other mages who are attacking me from range, I would much rather have a more consistent heavy attack than the splash damage. But yeah, Pillar is really the big change that came with Firestaff this patch. This with a couple of other things, but they didn't really change the ability in terms of like its stats or anything. The thing that got adjusted was its ease of use. So you're now able to use it much more reliably and quickly out of a dodge roll, or while you're moving or taking an attack or whatever it is. on top of that, the radius is a lot bigger, and I honestly hope and wish that all of the abilities in the game that are viable to get this change get the Pillar of Fire treatment. Now, it's obviously not going to work on things like Perforate or other abilities that put you in a channel, but anything that you have the time to cast before or after a dodge, I feel like should function like Pillar of Fire, because Pillar just feels so good to use now. I can't explain how many times I've bursted people by throwing out a pillar before they could even realize that they've taken my entire arsenal from my fire staff. It's really, really fun to use now, and I really hope that they kind of take that moving forward with the other abilities in mind. But it did get this new passive here where per stack of smolder or burn that you have on your target, it does more damage, which is really nice. But the aside from pillar and burnout, the thing that I feel that Firestaff really has now that it didn't have before is the damage over time. I'm not sure if they just increased the damage per stack or what it was, but you can definitely tell when you have 5 stacks of smolder on you now, and it ticks for a lot of damage. You're getting pretty much almost 600 to 700 damage per second if you have 5 stacks on somebody, so it is a lot of damage to put out. I can't tell you how many times in the middle of a brawl I've gotten random kills here or there by just throwing in spells into the group. So yeah, Firestaff is in a really fun place now. I'll definitely give it a try if you haven't given it a shot yet. And then as for our rapier, we are still running the same setup here. But yeah, let's take a look at some of the fights that I got into once PvP started feeling a little bit better. So the first and actually the only fight where I ended up testing out Incinerate was this one here. I ended up taking it off pretty quickly after, but we jump onto a Sword and Shield Firestaff user. We end up doing a pretty good job of dodging out of the way of that shield bash, but we're trying to see if we can get some damage in at the back line of the Zerg without really getting sucked into it too much. Take a little bit of damage and then get hit with a pretty nice stagger on their part, but I end up popping the Storm Form just to kind of negate any of the CC from that Firestaff, and we just absolutely pump the damage with the Rapier. End up taking out that target pretty quickly. As I mentioned, those fortified changes are very noticeable, but we go ahead and see if we can put some damage into the back of the Zerg here. Having Pillar of Fire would have definitely been of way more use here, but we're gonna go ahead and see if we can find a target to single out, and pretty soon here someone's gonna notice that I'm just kind of pelting them from behind and is gonna go ahead and try to switch on to me. I do end up getting a target quite low here, but you can see there what I meant about the melee tracking. It was just really hard to just do melee damage in general with somebody just simply walking away from you, which is the most frustrating part. So melee damage just felt super unreliable, but we end up getting jumped on by a second player here. Looks like it is a Spear Hatchet user. Take quite a bit of damage here as he lands the consecutive hits into our back there. We don't get rooted though, and we land the parry, which gives us a little bit of breathing room. And then I try to see what I can do to make a little bit of space, and as soon as I start taking damage from the second player here, I'm going to go ahead and pop my Stone Form and see if I can make a little bit more distance and make this fight a little bit more favorable for myself. So we kind of bring them up onto this rock here. While backpedaling, we put in a decent amount of damage with the Firestaff to get a really nice dodge on the player's ability behind us there with our evade and dodge roll. Follow up on that Spear player and we're able to get a finish. But then we end up running into a Bow player and almost go down again. We put in the footwork here, just barely kind of dodge a lot of these things that are going on and hitting us. The gemstone dust actually ends up saving my life there, but we just barely make it out. It looks like the mage at least has decided to not fight, so we go ahead and turn our attention back over to the bow user, get a pretty nice burnout on him, dodge his skewer, get a really nice riposte into the back, And again, like I mentioned, the second hit of my evade there just doesn't register. But we keep up the aggression. He does a good job of avoiding damage. We keep up the pressure with the fire staff, able to follow up with the burnout and put him into a state to where we are pretty much only going to lose this fight of a mistake of our own. And we almost go down there, as you can see, as I try to be a little bit too aggressive there, relying on the melee tracking that we used to have. But we get a really nice read on the sweep, land a pretty nasty riposte, and get a decent amount of damage in there. You see that burnout damage, almost finishing him off there, but then we just throw a fireball just to do that last little bit. And then we get a really clean fight there. I turn my attention over to the other mage. There's just been a ton of mages this patch if you haven't been in OPR. But he does have fireball. I'll try to put in a couple of attacks to see if I can just get some damage in. The only time that I think I end up using Incinerate in this fight was when he had Entomb. But right out of the Entomb, because he is in medium armor, it seems we are able to keep up the aggression, as he doesn't have mobility to get away from us. Just barely land that heavy attack, and then we get a really nice clean fight there without Pillar of Fire. So yeah, Fire Staff is just feeling really good, and we end up kind of just following this player and getting a finish off on him. Going into the next fight though, we do end up making the switch over to Pillar of Fire, and you're gonna immediately see the difference in how much damage this weapon can pump out with a setup like this. We are sitting outside of the enemy's back base, and I seem to have attracted a couple of the spawnees who are coming out. Start taking a little bit more damage or pressure from the ranged players than I wanted to. So I try to see if I can go ahead and make some line of sight. End up getting caught and almost go down, but we do have the stone form there to save us. I just barely make it out alive, and we're going to go ahead and see if we can just regen some health while backpedaling and putting in that damage. I try to go for a pillar there, but we end up missing our first. But these players are pretty hell-bent on killing me right now, so they're not even really paying attention to their health. Get a disgusting parry and finish off on that first player there. And you can see while moving backwards and trying to evade, we end up just putting in a ridiculous amount of damage into that player with the fire staff, and then we're able to go ahead and finish them off with our rapier. So this next situation here is going to be a little bit more tricky, as we have an actual tank with a healer. I know that I can damage out both of these targets if I really needed to, but being that we're so close to the enemy base, I'm really trying to look for an opportunity to where I can get a kill but still make it out if I need to, because of how likely there is for somebody else to end up joining this fight. But the healer is probably going to be my first target, and you see as soon as I end up landing a pillar on the healer there, you see that fireball come from off of my screen. We do end up getting caught by the root there from the Void Gauntlet, but we negate a lot of that damage with the riposte, and then in comes the Hatchet player as well to make a bunch of distance with the burnout. The Hatchet player is going to be really the only one who can keep up with our mobility. So we're going to go ahead and focus on him first. You can see while retreating here, we put in a lot of damage into the Hatchet player, get him down to below half. We do miss the pillar, but he's forced to use a potion. And then still the same thing, while backing up, we're able to just constantly throw out these spells, and we're able to finish off the Hatchet player there. But I do end up getting quite low. I managed to pop my stone form though, which keeps me alive, and I'm just gonna go ahead and burn out again just to make some more distance and try to funnel these players in instead of fighting them all at once. And you can see, as I mentioned, just the amount of pressure that you're able to put into people while retreating now, with how easy pillar is to use, it's just actually too much fun. And you can see the tank isn't paying attention to his health. We catch him in a parry around the corner, get a really nice finish off, and then we're left to the Void Gauntlet player. Being that it's not fire ice, I know that the only thing I have to watch it for is that right there, the Void Scream. And being that that is now out, we're going to go ahead and play a little bit more aggressive with the rapier and see if we can find an opening. I tried to time the riposte there for the Incinerate. We take the damage, we end up getting the stun, and just barely finish off the kill there for a really nice 3-piece there on the Fire Staff. And then last but not least here, one of those fights that I was mentioning that I would normally avoid at all costs and search for a smaller fight. But it actually is just so much more of a fun time to fight in these kinds of fights. So we're trying to see if we can put in some pressure onto the back line of the Zerg here, who's trying to secure Sun. We do a really nice job of evading and then parrying both of those hammer stuns, but we are taking quite a bit of pressure from the outskirts of all these mages here. So we're going to go ahead and make a little bit of distance and see if we can kind of pull a couple of these targets to us instead of having to just take a bunch of ranged DPS. Get very low. I try to go for a parry, get a cheeky little evade attack in there just to finish off that target, and then we finally get some assistance. I'm doing as good of a job as I can of avoiding all of these spells, but we just barely make it out alive. We have a couple of teammates now here with us, and then we're gonna go ahead and start pumping with the fire staff. So with my two teammates on that one player, I'm gonna go ahead and make my way to the back line here. Try to throw in a pillar here and there. The pillar is something that I'm still trying to get used to the aim of. It's a little bit tricky to figure out how far or how close you're actually aiming it. But it looks like our teammates here have finished off that one player who's behind us. Get a really nice combo in on that second one. We're going to go ahead, burn out. You see how much damage that burnout does now. We almost finish off the mage here, but I'm going to go ahead and leave him to our teammates. And then switch my attention over back to the main Zerg, who seems to have made a decent push outside of stun here. And again, it's going to go ahead and start pumping in that damage into the group. So we throw our fireball, throw out a pillar. The cooldowns on both of those is incredibly low now. Not only do we have full refreshing, but landing those heavy attacks and fireballs is going to reduce our cooldowns even more. So we can just constantly be throwing up pillars, which is just a ridiculous amount of damage if you can land them. Trying to skirt on the back line to see if we can damage the ranged DPS and the healers. Put in a really nice amount of damage with the fire staff onto this bow user. Get a burnout, almost finished them off. But I'm going ahead to see if I can just finish off. We bait out the parry there and then get a nice little finish with the fireball. And then I turn my attention back to the reinforcements here from the enemy base. Trying to not get caught out too far though, so you see me kind of do a little bit of a backwards maneuver there just to see and make sure that I'm not overextended. But again, just the amount of consistent damage that fire staff is able to put out now is just something that I'm not used to, and I don't think I'm ever gonna get tired of this. Get in a really nice sequence of attacks in on that one player there. We get a little bit of assistance and finish him off. I go ahead and pop my stone from here just to make sure we don't get caught by anything, because we can get bursted out pretty quickly. Land a beautiful pillar on that player as well. Just actually having a fun time in this brawl. We land another kill there with the bleed, or from the burn, excuse me, and then we end up going down. But yeah, PvP in general is feeling a lot better. I know that I've been gone for quite a bit, and I do apologize for that, but we are hopefully going to get back onto schedule now. As always, if you guys have any questions or anything, please let me know in the comments, and thank you so much and have a great day.